Well, this week, Dr. Eric Weinstein, the mathematician many credit with founding the intellectual dark web, wrote a despairing post on X that summed up his feelings on America's big decision day. It read, "I'm failing this election. I tried, but I simply failed. I cannot work within these concepts. My world, my country, my America is not on the ballot." Well, that post has been viewed over 7 million times already, with many echoing his lament. But many commentators have accused Dr. Weinstein of sitting on the fence and squandering his significant influence at a critical moment for the country. And he joins me now. Eric, great to have you back on Uncensored. You decided in the end to say what you said. You saw the extraordinary reaction to that, good, bad and ugly. A lot of people saying you've been a bit cowardly here. What do you say to them?
Well, I find that somewhat funny because standing up to one political party alone is bad enough. Standing up to two just makes things worse. In general, to me, cowards lead mobs, they incite mobs, and they fight from within mobs, particularly behind the veil of anonymity. So it has nothing to do with that, and I also think that the post was widely misinterpreted.
So let's clarify what you meant. So tell me what you really meant by that post.
Sure. Imagine that you have two restaurants and that both of them are failing the health grade. One of them may be failing the health grade by much more than the other because it has problems with fecal matter in the food, let's say. You may say, I can tolerate the risk of going to the one that's less dangerous, but you can't recommend the restaurants to somebody else because, quite frankly, they're both super dangerous. Now, in my opinion, the Democratic Party has become something completely ununderstandable, unrecognizable, and its leadership appears, in my mind, to be evil. And that is my party. The Republican Party is far more chaotic, but both parties have chosen a strategy where instead of courting common sense people, somewhat in the middle, although I don't think it's it's a linear spectrum anymore at all, they've decided to hang on to their extremes and pretend that they aren't there or not incredibly toxic and violent. And in part, my frustration is that in order for me to recommend a party, and I was hoping to recommend a ticket this election cycle, I don't think Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have given me any possibility of recommending them. So unless somebody can make that argument to me directly in the last few days, I just see it as an impossibility. I was very disappointed in some sense because I have three friends in the Big Six on the Republican side, which would be RFK Jr., Tulsi, and J.D. Vance. And my feeling about this is that we have a situation by which the Republican Party is just completely incautious. And if you see the reaction, just search on my name and the word Jew. You'll see exactly how much toxicity is hiding amongst the good people of MAGA. And too few of them, by the way, have the courage to stand up when somebody's being attacked. And so I think it's a bit rich that the cowards who privately message me and say, we support you, don't say something in public when they're watching a mob descend on an individual. And quite honestly, I wasn't hoping to take on MAGA, but if that's what it takes to stand up and say, you cannot brutalize people like this, and inciting mobs against individuals is what I thought you were accusing the Democrats of doing. And now you've stared into the abyss and it stares back.
I mean, Chris Rufo said, this is narcissism marked as idealism. It's absurd to expect politics to conform to one's individual preferences and idiosyncrasies. The essence of politics is decision under imperfect conditions. If you can't figure out how to rank Trump and Harris, you're just navel-gazing. Your response?
Chris who? I mean, it's sort of my response. In other words, this is an individual who's been very successful arousing passions, and he's been very effective in being very aggressive. I think he has actually an excellent point that in many ways the Republicans have been too passive. And so in order to compensate for that flaccid aspect of Republicans rolling over in the past, he's decided to go red meat. As to whether it's narcissism or navel-gazing or cowardice or fence-sitting or any of the other epithets, I was hoping he would dig a little bit deeper into his thesaurus, but it's offensive, and I'm just not going to get particularly exercised. People have heard me ad nauseum about the problems with the Democratic Party. If I was to join MAGA, I would start criticizing MAGA in particular for blinding itself to the real problems of January 6th, just the way I point out that on the Democratic side, I don't believe it was a free and fair election in 2020 because of the interference through the tech companies and a problem with the news media that I would call a rhizome. A rhizome is like quaking aspen. You think you see a bunch of different trees, but it's actually one organism, and all you're seeing is it breaking through the ground in different places. For some reason, the Democratic machine seems to control all sorts of different newspapers that basically engage in something which I've called journopaigning, which is campaigning while pretending that you have immunity under the guise of journalism. And journopaigning is the scourge of these elections. So I've called the 2020 election not free and fair, and I've called the January 6th and the Georgia interference a serious question. And everyone I know who's chosen one side or the other will blind themselves to one of these two facts. And that's, I'm trying to get America back. To my friends in the Republican Party, I understand that you understand that there are winners and losers, and that's how you think and that's how you talk, but it matters how you win. And if you don't believe me, try to think about how many people have a poster of Lance Armstrong on their wall.
Right, that's a very good point. What you did came at a time when there's a lot of attention around some of the major newspapers in America, from the Washington Post to the LA Times, USA Today, all deciding not to endorse anybody at this election, which has caused fury with their journalists because historically they voted Democrat. And in a way, it's exposed the very liberal leanings of many of these newsrooms, that there's fury amongst journalists that they haven't once again said vote Democrat. But Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, said this. He said, most people believe the media is biased. Anyone who doesn't see this is paying scant attention to reality. And those who fight reality lose. Presidential endorsements do nothing to tip the scales of an election. What presidential endorsements actually do is create a perception of bias, a perception of non-independence. Ending them is a principled decision, and it's the right one. Obviously, it's a different circumstance to you and the pressure that you came under to endorse either side. But what did you make of Bezos' argument for not allowing the Washington Post to endorse?
Mr. Bezos, you have far larger problems than the endorsement issue. You have a problem of journalism. May I just point out, you went after me because I was the supposed far-right podcast host who had J.D. Vance on his program. And when I did that, I talked to him about something called the grandmother hypothesis, which is a scientific theory put forward by effectively George C. Williams and his students. You covered that, I think, in 2015, and you wrote in your paper, not you personally, but the journalist, since having children is what drives evolution, there's no good evolutionary reason for women to live past their ability to reproduce. And instead, what you did is you took my far more careful statement talking about evolutionary females, and you tried to tar J.D. Vance with it as if we were both opting to enslave older women only for the care of the young. Quite honestly, what you have is you have a paper that is effectively lobbying for the right to be hypocritical. You're an anti-science organization. If you want me to explain to you how you violated journalistic ethics as by the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, which has undergone many revisions, any version of it, you're not bending over backwards to do objective journalism. You have a printed code of ethics. All you need to do is follow it. I applaud the fact that you are starting to bring the paper back to being an actual newspaper, but right now what you have is an anti-scientific wing of the Democratic Party of the United States, and that's not a partisan position. That is my party, and I would previously have regarded the Washington Post as one of the 3 finest newspapers in the United States of America. What's going on? You better fix it. You're rich enough to do it. Stop dragging your feet, and it's time to make reparations to the people that your paper has wronged. But if you choose to start with me, I would be delighted.
Should newspapers of that stature endorse anyway? I mean, is Bezos, I'm notwithstanding the criticisms you've just outlined, is Bezos right in the principle that the Post didn't historically used to endorse until, I think, several decades ago, and then they began to endorse? Is it something a newspaper should do? Or is he right that instinctively, if you want to avoid a suggestion of bias, you just shouldn't get into the endorsement business?
Traditionally, there's a Chinese wall between the news division and the opinion and editorial pages of a paper. And if that Chinese wall is strong, then both of them give us some insight, because in fact the editors are sitting over the news, and this is their opportunity to say we are biased by what we see, and we wish to give normative judgments rather than merely descriptive judgments of the news as we see it. In the current era, there should be no endorsement. The most important thing is for news organizations to go back to being journalistic organizations. The reporters simply flagrantly violate the printed code of ethics, and this isn't difficult. It's just that everybody's been having a bacchanal rather than following the rules of journalism. This has been an orgy of partisanship and journopaigning, and we don't know what to do about it. And quite honestly, you're rich enough, clean it up.
The big furore that blew up at the weekend, I was at the rally at Madison Square Garden, the first one I've been to of Trump's, and it sparked garbage gate in all its guises and everything. Let's take a little mash-up look at the rally itself, and I'll come to you with a question.
This is Donald Trump's house, brother.
She's a fake, a fraud, she's a pretender. Her and her pimp handlers will destroy our country.
I'm not going to do conspiracy, and I'm not going to do conspiracy. But it's kind of funny that they tried everything else, and now they're trying to kill him. They better not.
I don't see no stinking Nazis in here.
Homeless and veterans, Americans, sleeping in their own feces on a bench in Central Park. But the illegals, they get whatever they want, don't they?
The only thing I see in here are a bunch of hard-working men and women that are real Americans, brother.
Now, it was interesting to me, we'll get to garbage gate in a moment, but Arnold Schwarzenegger seems to have gone on a similar kind of journey as you've done about questioning who he should be endorsing. Ultimately, he did come down, excuse me, but he came down on the side of Kamala Harris, and he explained, we need to close the door on this chapter of American history. I know that former President Trump won't do that. He will divide, he will insult, he will find new ways to be more un-American than he already has been, and we the people will get nothing but more anger. He said, I'll always be an American before I'm a Republican. That's why I'm voting for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. What did you make of his explanation for why he would be voting against his historic party? And in relation to what we saw at Madison Square Garden, were you concerned about the rhetoric that came off the stage there or not?
It's a bunch of different questions, so let me do my best. First of all, I can't possibly figure out how he imagines that the Democratic Party can put the country back together again. My guess is that only Donald Trump can further divide it or put it back together. And if it's Kamala Harris, we're going to be waiting probably a period of 4 years, given that she won no primaries and her party has pulled off the mask as to how it chooses to operate. Donald Trump could further divide us, or he could choose to unite us. And in fact, if he decided to go with the super ticket idea and say, look, you don't have to vote for me, vote for any of the six, that's an ingenious political move. It will change American politics forever, because it will give people the ability to see that he's put his own ego aside. He didn't choose to do that. I think that Donald Trump could, he has an ability to be very presidential when he likes, and he has an ability to be hell on wheels when he feels it's warranted. I think if you look at the second potential shooter of Donald Trump, you have to be really unwilling to consider conspiracies before you start worrying about what a single bullet could do to the entire country. It would be a tragic occurrence if it were to end the life of Donald Trump. But I'm not really sure people have an idea of what would happen in a heavily armed country had that second shooter got off a shot that found its mark. I think we are teetering. We're on a time, I don't know what the right analogy is. We are in a very precarious situation. My decision to stay out, in part, is to take a hit during the election because there have to be voices for afterwards. If you recall, you need people when tensions are high who have not gone partisan. And so I'm just going to take a bunch of lumps and say that right now we've had 2.5 shooters towards Donald Trump. I worry that there is an amendment to the Constitution, maybe the 14th, Section 3, that could provide for a challenge saying that an insurrectionist, if January 6th was called that way, could not assume office. I'm not sure where we are. Where we are is extremely precarious. And as I said before on Chris Williamson's program, I'm not sure that Donald Trump will be allowed to become president. I definitely believe that if it's a landslide, he stands a far better chance. But I believe that the foreign policy machinery of the United States is sufficiently worried about what he would do in Ukraine, what he would do with NATO, how he would handle the attempted permanent alliances and agreements of the United States while in office, that it feels incredibly threatened. And I really do think that grown-up responsible people need to pay far more attention to the second shooter than the first.
When you say Trump won't be allowed to be president, what do you actually mean by that?
I don't know. I'm trying to say that I think that there are elements who view potentially the release of information around Jeffrey Epstein, who view information around potentially the JFK assassination, who worry about covert operations in Ukraine becoming exposed or compromised. I think that there are a great number of things that are quiet, that are assumed to be respected by both political candidates. And I think what's happened is that you've got a populist who has signaled that he is not going to play by the rules of the permanent class in Washington, D.C. and beyond. And I believe that that is Donald Trump's best quality. It is the thing for which he is most beloved. And I think it is the thing that within the Beltway he is most feared and hated for. And I just don't think people understand the depths to which certain operatives will go to potentially frustrate his campaign. And frustrate is a word that I choose to leave ambiguous.
Another conservative commentator, Mike Cernovich, he said of your decision not to make a decision, said, or to not to choose a party, said, "This is pathetic. Every word you write," he said, "oozes moral cowardice and a pivotal moment in American history. This is self-important horseshit, best suited for the therapist chair." Do you have a response to that? I mean, that's the more visceral end of the rage that your decision seems to have inspired in some conservative circles.
As somebody who stands up to mobs regularly, I'm not really worried about somebody trying to fit me with a pink tutu in front of the world. I know Mike. Mike's a very, very smart guy. I've found him a long time ago, even when he was radioactive. I think he's a guy who really believes in what he calls the guerrilla mindset, and the idea is that there are winners and losers. There are real men and there are pussies. And so in that snap-to-grid universe, that's what I am. He knows better. Why he chose to do that in public, I have no idea. But I'm not going to go after Mike Cernovich in public right now. I'll just say this. Boy, the MAGA people are bad strategists. The idea of trying to figure out whether you can incite me to say a bunch of really negative things about MAGA right before an election, or the idea that you want me to move out of the Democratic Party towards the Republicans, where I'm far more important being a critic of my own party. These guys just don't seem to understand, in some sense, how to win properly, how to have allies. And if you wanted to ask me to answer the question about Madison Square Garden, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, please do.
So I think that basically the left of center people don't understand the amount of love and positivity and hope and energy that party has, which is not dead from the neck down. I think that there was a huge coming together of people, brown, blue, green, yellow, white, doesn't matter, Jews, Muslims, et cetera, et cetera. That said, I think it was very heavily tilted towards red meat. It was very heavily tilted towards men over women. The edgy comic Tony Hinchcliffe, I'm going to just stand up for him and say he's absolutely brilliant. I know him a little personally. In person, he's the nicest, sweetest human being. He was talking not about humans as garbage. He was talking about a garbage problem on an island that has landfills. Nevertheless, very dangerous to do, that kind of insult comedy in a Madison Square Garden. There was an attempt to tie it to the 1939 rally. I can promise you I've gone to Eric Clapton concerts at Madison Square Garden. Nobody made a comparison of Eric Clapton to Nazis. These people are fighting in just a horrific smear campaign where the Democratic Party's chief tool is personal destruction. And they're trying to destroy people who went and tar them with the brush of Nazis. Now, that said, there are absolutely bigots, anti-Semites, really horrible people inside of MAGA that MAGA will not clear out, just the way, I'll tell it to you this way. The Democratic Party will not clear out the people who were celebrating October 7th as an act of resistance by the great humanitarian Sinwar. And the Republicans will not clear out all of those people shouting at me that I should go back to Israel because what have Jews ever done for America? We're basically a fifth column in the United States. Check your nuclear weapons and see who made you the absolute strongest country as Americans. I'm sick to death of people being quiet. I'm talking not about the bad people in MAGA. I'm talking about the really good people, the people I love, whose back I have in MAGA. You don't have my back. That's your problem. Your problem is that you contact me privately rather than publicly. And you know that this is dangerous talk. It's not just a question of, quote, those mean tweets. You've got that wrong. This is the precursor to really bad things happen. Look at what happened in Beyoğlu in Istanbul during the 50s. Look at what happened in Germany in the 30s. When you allow people to start talking recklessly like this is the appetizer, it's the prelude, it's the precursor to violence. And quite honestly, both of these parties should have thrown the bad apples out and competed for the middle and the moderates and the reasonable people. And instead, they were pussies and they clung to their extremists in order to win an election. And it's going to be up to those of us who have to stand up to both of these parties to put this country back together. And, I'm not going to use my French on this podcast, but I'm sick to death of men with masculinity issues yelling coward at people who stand up to mobs. If you want to incite a mob or you want to hide within one or you want to hide behind anonymity, you've given us your calling card.
Eric, you've said you're not going to endorse, but does that mean necessarily that you're not going to cast a vote? Could it be that you may vote privately without saying who you voted for?
Absolutely. Yeah. In other words, either party could have looked at itself and said, you know what, we have a huge problem, and we're willing to look at ourselves in order to win the people who want a home. I don't want to be homeless. And by the way, Chris Rufo and Mike Cernovich, they just don't get it. I can look past all sorts of things. The threshold for me endorsing a party means that party isn't going to corrode me in order to keep my membership card, right? In other words, I intend to talk about the problems of Georgia on January 6th and the fact that the election of 2020 was not free and fair. If you require me to blind myself to one set of those things, I can't join you and I can't recommend you to others. Now, does that mean that I'm not willing to take the risk when I go to the ballot box and cast a vote? No, I'm willing to do it. I have 4 choices. I can vote for Kamala Harris, I can vote for Donald Trump in the super ticket, I can vote for a third party or a write-in candidate and thereby avoid the choice, or I cannot vote at all. The only thing that I'm really thinking is not going to happen is I probably cannot find any path to voting for Kamala Harris. But what I choose to do privately is not a question of wimping out. You also had the opportunity to win me over. And what I said in the next tweet, which we haven't mentioned, is I'll work with anyone who wants to put the country back together. But if the idea is, show us how tough you are, put on a MAGA hat, or show us, that you're true blue and you'll sing from the blue hymnal, you got to be kidding. Boy, do you have a wrong number.
And Eric, finally, who do you think is going to win this election?
I think it's going to be Donald Trump if it's counted accurately.
Yeah,
and
I got to say,
due to the theory of.
No, please finish.
After you, sir. It's in part due to the theory of Timur Kuran. I think in 8 years, I have never seen a human being wearing a MAGA hat. And I've traveled all over the country. I don't know how that's possible. People hide their support for Donald Trump because Donald Trump makes life hard. He makes it ugly. If you have, let's say, a male-female divide in your family, or you have a family that is dependent on a blue employer or whatever, Donald Trump is quite honestly completely inconsiderate about the problems that he's causing inside of your world. You know, he's boorish and he's a brute. On the other hand, you could easily make the case, as Dave Rubin has said artfully, said you can't dream about a panther in a china shop. You're getting a bull whether you like it or not. If you want some of the china knocked over, all of it's going to get knocked over. Now, what my opinion is that you may want to risk a brute to break out of this incredible stranglehold that the Democratic Party rhizome, the Journopaigning, the academic institutions, all of these things that are so supposedly neutral that always seem to go in one direction, they have to figure out how to break that stranglehold. Now, what you're seeing is that these newspapers are choosing not to endorse because Kamala didn't win any primaries, and she's a horrible, horrible candidate. As a result of that, we don't know who's running the country. Biden's declining mental condition, if you'll check my old tweets, I've been talking about this for 4 years. What we have is a national mass delusion that in some sense the Democratic Party is playing by the rules when it isn't. And, you know, in this situation, we're in unprecedented territory. The question is, do you want a brute who might actually be a greater danger, or he might be the thing like, you know, radiation or chemotherapy that you need to kill the cancer if it doesn't kill you first.
Eric Weinstein, as always, fascinating to get your perspective. I really appreciate it.
Piers, thanks very much for having me on.